Welcome back to Buddhist Audio Bookshelf. Today, we resume our journey through Dharma Talks by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, Geoffrey DeGraff. Join us in delving deeper into these profound teachings. This audiobook, meticulously crafted by Buddhist Audio Bookshelf, aims to share the wisdom of the Buddha. Your support in spreading these teachings is invaluable. Subscribe, like, and share to extend the reach of these transformative insights. Let's collectively nurture a world enriched by the Buddha's profound guidance. Sit back, absorb, and let the essence of these teachings resonate within you as we continue this enlightening exploration. Survival Tactics. May 2001. You know the passage where the Buddha says that heedlessness is the path to death. When you're sloppy and careless, you die. He's not talking only about physical survival, although that is an important consideration, and many people do die because of their own carelessness. But here he's talking more about the survival of the mind, the good qualities in your mind. When you're careless, the good qualities in your mind die. And when they die, what do you have left? There may be brute survival of the body, but it's not worth all that much. When we come to practice the Buddha's teachings, we're basically learning survival techniques for the mind, how to keep the mind's good qualities going strong. Observing the precepts, practicing concentration, developing discernment. Those are the tactics. The meditation we're doing right now. That's a survival tactic for the mind. Both on the everyday level and at the moment of death. The tactics you learn, the techniques you learn while you're meditating, are going to stand you in good stead. The steps we have here, focusing on the breath, making it comfortable, spreading it throughout the body, allowing it to grow calm to the point where there's a sense of ease and rapture, the beginning stages of breath meditation. These are useful not only on the cushion or your meditation seat, but also in daily life. In other words, by focusing on the breath you keep the mind in the present moment, because that's an important place to stay. That's where all your decisions are being made. All your karma is being created right here in the present moment. If you're not here, a lot of things get decided on a subconscious level. On a reactive level, while you're off someplace else. These are the forces shaping your life, and yet you're not watching over them. So the first thing is to bring yourself into the present moment. And then you create a sense of ease and well-being in the present moment as well, one that helps you stay there and at the same time gives the mind something to feed on. Ultimately, of course, we want to get the mind to a place where it doesn't have to feed, but in the meantime it has to feed on something. So you give it something good to feed on. The sense of well-being you create simply by breathing in a way that feels good, breathing out in a way that feels good, so your mind doesn't go off feeding on things outside. What this person said, what that person did. That kind of stuff is junk food. It may be fun to feed on, but it doesn't give the mind any nourishment. It actually saps your strength. Like fast food. It may taste good for a while, but there's so much cholesterol in it that over the long term it turns to sludge in your arteries and clogs them up. The normal things the mind tends to feed on in the course of the day, this person's actions, that person's words, are junk food for the mind. But when the mind has something really good to feed on, right here in the present moment, it doesn't want to feed outside. Things can pass right by you. You see other people's words, their actions, and they just go right past you, in the sense that they don't come in and wound the mind. You see them clearly. It's not that you're oblivious to these things and you can make good choices on what to do when someone else does something harmful or makes a mistake. But it doesn't wound the mind, because you haven't taken it in. Most of us are like little children. Anything that gets near your mouth, you just swallow it right down. Rocks, bits of glass, insects and dirt. And when they harm you, you go and complain about what other people are doing. Well, it's your fault that you went and swallowed the stuff down in the first place. So if you give the mind something good to feed on, like the comfortable sensation of the breath coming in and going out, the mind has a good source of nourishment. As it gets a taste of comfort, you begin to notice when it's not comfortable. Often that discomfort is associated with unskillful states of mind arising. Anger, greed, jealousy, fear. These things will cause a change in the breath. If you're there with the breath and you're used to having it comfortable, you notice these changes immediately. They'll alert you to the fact that something's gone wrong in the mind. Again, for most of us, we're off someplace else when these things begin to take a foothold in the mind. By the time we realize it, they've taken over. They kill off whatever goodness we may have. That's why heedlessness is the path to death. You get careless about what's happening in the mind, and then all sorts of things can start coming in. But when you're right there, sensitive to the slightest little unpleasantness in the breath, it's an alert. It alerts you to when things are happening. And then what do? Another one of the steps we practice here. Once the breath is comfortable, you let it spread throughout the body. So you breathe through the uncomfortable breath sensations. Breathe in a way that loosens up the tension in the body accompanying the anger, the fear, or whatever. You then find yourself in a much better position to act on the situation that got you angry in the first place. You can respond reasonably, wisely, with clarity, because you're not overwhelmed with a sense that you've got to get that tension out of your system it's already dissolved out of your system. What's left is the awareness that something should be done, but you now have the space to decide. What should be done? Should it be done right now or later? You can see much more clearly what the situation is and what would be the appropriate response. So these basic steps in breath meditation are very important for daily survival of the goodness of the mind. Keeping you in touch with decisions being made in the mind, keeping you in touch with the emotions that are threatening to overcome the mind, and giving you tools to deal with them so that you're in charge. Even more so, when life comes to an end, the fact that you've developed these skills is going to be very helpful. Most people are overwhelmed by the process of dying. The body, which always used to seem to work all right, suddenly starts malfunctioning. The body, which they identified with, which they've invested so much time and energy in, starts falling apart. They feel lost and betrayed. And then where do they go? For people who don't have any training in meditation, that's a real killer, not only physically but also mentally. If you've got these skills mastered, you've got a better place for the mind to stay. You can deal with whatever thoughts come up. And all kinds of thoughts are going to come thronging into your awareness at that point. This regret, that disappointment, this complaint. There's going to be a lot of negative stuff. But if you've got good solid mindfulness and good clear awareness in the present moment, you can just watch these things come and watch them go. You don't have to grab onto them. If you're really skilled in your meditation, you will have found a place where the present moment opens up into the deathless. Then you're really safe, no matter what happens. The body falls apart, all kinds of things can happen, but there's that secure place. Ajahn Fuang once said that when you're practicing meditation, you're practicing how to die properly. And these skills that we're working on when we're sitting right here, they're your survival skills, both on a day-to-day level, and also when the time comes for the mind to separate from the body, to separate from all its mental events, everything associated with this life. If you do it skillfully, the awareness that's left will separate out, will have nothing to worry about, either in the present or on into the future. A quiet spot. July 2001. Time to let all your thoughts about the outside world just fall away. Whatever you've been thinking about, whatever places your mind has been scattered, just let them drop, and bring your attention right in, right here, right at the breath. There's a lot of unfinished business out there in the world, but it's always going to be unfinished. One job gets done and another one comes right on it. A lot of the problem is with the mind itself. There are days when things are perfectly fine, but the mind starts getting antsy. It can't help but think, what's next there out on the horizon? If you follow that particular tendency, it never comes to an end. There's always going to be work to do. When people say they've finished the job, it's because they just get too weak to do it, and so whatever's left has to stay left undone. So for the time being, just leave things undone. Let's create this little corner of quietness in the mind. That's what Ajahn Suwat liked to call Wat Metta. A corner of quietness. But he also talked about meditation as a corner of quietness, this place where the mind can really be solid and settle down and have a firm foundation, even in the midst of all the things that are infirm and unsettled in the rest of the world. After all, when we talk about the world, it's not just the world outside. The world inside the mind also has a lot of unfinished business. And the urge is to decide, okay, what business needs doing? To decide, ask yourself, what are the tasks that, when you do them, they really do get done, so that you really do have something accomplished in the mind? This is why the Buddha was so particular about which questions he would answer, and which ones he wouldn't, which issues were worth dealing with, which ones were worth just putting aside. You can't take on everything, so you have to focus on what's important. Have a sense of priorities, not only in your life at large, but also in where you focus your attention, where you focus your energy, right here, right now. So focus on the breath. There are lots of other things you could focus on right here, right now, but you limit yourself to the breath. See what the breath is doing. Is it coming in? Is it going out? Is it comfortable? Is it not comfortable? If the mind wants to analyze things, there's plenty to analyze right here. If it wants to settle down, just make the breath comfortable and allow the mind to settle down. But do your best to monitor what the mind is doing, so that it stays alert and mindful, and doesn't go drifting off other places. Keep it right here with the sense of the body breathing in, breathing out. As for everything else in the area of your awareness, just let it go. Take this as your beachhead. This is the spot that you're going to develop. So you have your spot here in the body, you have this place of quiet and focus in the mind. And there'll be other things going on that you notice. There's chatter in the background in this part of the mind here, in this part of the mind there, this thought comes up, that comes up. And your ability to say, no, thanks, and just come back to the breath. That's what helps develop this quiet center here. And don't think that what you're doing is selfish. It's like the monastery. We create a little quiet corner up here in the mountains, away from the rest of the world, but don't think that it doesn't have an effect on the rest of the world. It does. The more quiet there is here, the better it is for the rest of the world. And it's the same with your mind. The more quietude you can have in this one spot, the more stillness, the more steadiness you can get going here, the more the whole rest of the mind benefits. And the people around you benefit as well. Once you've got this quiet spot going, then, when you act from this quiet spot. When you speak from this quiet spot. When you think from this quiet spot. When impulses arise in the mind, the observer standing in this quiet spot can look at them and see what's worth acting on, what's not worth acting on. And this way not only do you benefit, but, as I said, the people around you benefit as well. They're no longer a victim of your unquiet, unfocused mind. So once this quiet spot gets more settled, it begins to spread out to affect the rest of your mind. It's like starting a little fire. You may have a lot of brush to set fire to, but in the beginning it's just a little tiny flame. And you have to be very protective of it because the wind and all sorts of other things will try to put it out. So you have to cup your hands around it, be very protective of it. But once it takes, then it'll spread. When the Buddha described meditation, he used the word jhana, which is related to the verb jayati, to burn. But it's the burning, not of a wood fire, but of an oil lamp. It's a steady flame that you're trying to get going here. Once the steady flame gets established, then it begins to spread, so there's a sense of steadiness and brightness throughout the whole body. As the breath energy gets good in one spot, you allow it to flow to other spots. So the little spot begins to expand, and you find that this still awareness fills the whole body. It feels like the background from which everything else comes, and to which everything returns. But you don't come out or return along with anything. You're right there at the stillness, the sense of expansive awareness. So even though in the beginning of the meditation it may seem that there's a little fence around the mind, there are restrictions on the mind, it's just for the purpose of getting things established. It's like your hands cupped around the flame that you're trying to light. Once the flame has caught hold of the kindling, then it begins to grow on its own, and it grows larger and larger. So it's not always going to be restrictive. In fact, when the sense of concentration gets solid and begins to spread out through the body, you find that it's much more expansive than your ordinary states of awareness. And it's all right here. So we start out with this little corner, this little spot. Look after it. Make sure it's still. Make sure it's quiet. Make sure your attention doesn't wander away. If it does wander away, just bring it right back, bring it right back. It's wandering off. Is a sign that it was blown off by a gust of wind here or there, so you just bring it right back. And do your best to protect this little flame of stillness, this little, still flame you've got going here. Once it catches, then it can expand. And the sense of openness and the sense of relief that come with that level of concentration. It's hard to find anything to compare. But the important part in the beginning lies in doing the groundwork properly, because that's where most of the dangers lie. Once those dangers are past, then things begin to open up in the mind. Of course, there will be other dangers, but the most difficult part in the beginning is just getting the mind to settle down, to become established with a proper sense of balance, not too little energy, not too much energy, just right. And until you get that sense of just right, there's going to be a lot of trial and error. Sometimes it seems like trying to balance a ball bearing on the end of a needle. It just keeps slipping off, slipping off. But, finally, once it gets established, you realize that it's a lot more solid than you thought. Once you recognize it, then you can keep coming back, coming back. You know that spot. This is how the concentration becomes more and more of a skill. New feeding habits for the mind. August 2001. The juxtaposition of those two chants just now, the one that says, subject to aging, subject to illness, subject to death, subject to separation, and the other that starts out, may I be happy, may all living beings be happy. That's the human predicament. We're sitting here in this body that's going to age, grow ill, and die someday, and yet we want to be happy. And we want to be happy in a way that doesn't cause suffering to anybody else, either. And this, if the mind is constantly weighed down with aging, illness, death, and separation, is very difficult. Most cruel actions come from people who are suffering. When you see a cruel action, it's usually coming from the person's feeling weak, feeling threatened, at his wit's end. Acts of kindness and compassion come from a feeling of well-being in the mind. So when we look for true well-being, true happiness, it's not a selfish desire. But still, we're stuck with this problem. The body is going to age, grow ill, and die. Our mental faculties are going to go away. And how are we going to handle that situation when it comes? How are we handling it as it's encroaching upon us now? That's what the fifth contemplation in the chant is about. I'm the owner of my actions, heir to my actions. It's through our actions that we can make a difference. The Buddha says that there are 4 kinds of action. Skillful actions in the worldly sense, unskillful actions, a mixture of the two, and then the action that leads to an end of action. In other words, the action that leads you outside of the cycle of the world altogether. So this is what we're working on here as we meditate. First, learning what it means to act. As the Buddha said, action is intention. So we practice meditation to get to know our intentions. One way to do that is to set up an intention in the mind and see what happens as you try to keep it going. Focus your intention on the breath. Say to yourself, I'm going to stay with the breath for the hour. That's all I'm going to notice, that's all I'm going to worry about. See how long you can make the intention last. If your powers of mindfulness and alertness are strong, you can maintain that intention. If they're still weak, and the intention gets lost, you just set the intention up again. Set it up again and again and again. Don't give in, because if you can't stick with this little intention, how are you going to deal with the larger issues in life? If you don't have the mindfulness and alertness to maintain this much, how will they be able to help you through more difficult situations? So we're training these mental faculties in the same way that you train the body, strengthen the body. If you want to be strong, You don't go out and buy a new strong body from somebody else. You take your weak body and you exercise it. Exercise is what makes it strong. In the same way, you exercise these qualities of mind that can help make your intentions stick. And you begin to see that as you maintain these intentions with skill, they really do make a difference in the mind because they give it a new foundation for its well-being. You don't have to depend on the body, you don't have to depend on people outside you. You've got a skill within the mind that's purely mental, using the body as a foundation, developing mental skills that will make a difference. Once the mind has this sense of center, it brings a stability and steadiness to your life. You're not constantly subjected to buffeting from forces outside. No matter which direction the winds blow from, you can stay steady and still, and watch to see what's going on around you. Your ability to stay still like this is what enables you to see. If you're streaking through life, all you see is the blur on either side. Only when you stop and stand still can you see not only what's going on around you, but also what's going on inside, those very subtle movements of the mind that can cause you to get attached to things that are going to change on you. You begin to realize that the mind's habit of latching onto the body is not necessarily something it has to do. Its habit of latching onto feelings, or perceptions, or thought constructs, awareness of this or that. It doesn't have to latch onto those things. It latches on because it doesn't yet have the strength to stand alone, doesn't have any better place to go. It's dependent on these things, wants to feed on these things, to see what kind of nourishment they give. And sometimes they give a little good nourishment, but for the most part they're junk food. Now, as the Buddha says, suffering is the mind's habit of feeding like this. So we try to give the mind something better to feed on. A sense of well-being inside, the sense of well-being that comes as you learn to adjust the breath, settle down into the breath, make friends with the breath, learn to savor the breath the same way you would good food or good music. What does this flow of energy feel like as it comes through the body? What kind of flow would the body like to feel right now? Do you know? Can you tell? Most of us live within the body for how many years, and we don't know what kind of breathing the body would like to do, what would feel good for the body to do right now. So take some time to explore, to get acquainted with it. As you develop this inner sense of well-being and stability, you find that the mind would much rather feed here than outside. There may still be some stress, some slight sense of burdensomeness in having to feed here, but at least it's better than what the mind tended to feed on before. You begin to look back upon thoughts of lust, thoughts of anger, thoughts of greed, and you begin to wonder, why did I ever want to feed on those? What kind of nourishment did they provide? Nothing really solid, nothing really substantial, nothing really helpful at all. Once you learn how to let go of those things, you learn to stop feeding on things bad for the mind. And when you're not weighing the mind down in that way, when you're not giving it junk food to clog up its arteries, there's a greater sense of lightness, health, and well-being. When the mind feels light and healthy like this, it's much easier for you to feel compassionate, not only for yourself, but also for people around you. Ultimately, you get to the point where the mind is so well fed, so strong, that it doesn't have to feed anymore at all. That's when the mind is totally free. It's like when you go out camping. One of the big problems in going camping is that you have to carry your food everywhere you go. That puts a limit on how far you can go, how many days you can go out on a particular trip, because you've got to keep your food stores low enough so that you can carry them, but not so low that you're confined to 1 or 2 day trips. Think of how much you could wander around if you didn't have to feed. Many times I've felt I'd like to wander off into the canyons at Zion and disappear, but I can't, because the body has to feed. And as they say, you can't eat the scenery. But when you put the mind in a position where it doesn't have to feed, it's really free. It's not weighed down by anything, not confined by anything. This is what the Buddha meant by nibbana. The word nibbana comes from a fire's going out. Back in those days they had a conception that fire was trapped by its fuel, because it had to keep clinging to the fuel to get its sustenance. But when it went out, it let go of the fuel and was released. It was no longer confined. You couldn't even describe it as existing, non-existing, both, or neither. It was that free. So that's what the Buddha was talking about with Nibbana. The mind doesn't feed anymore. When it doesn't feed, it's not confined to its food source, doesn't have to carry its food source around, isn't limited by where there's food and where there's not. When you look back, you realize that the steps you were following along the practice were precisely that fourth kind of karma. The karma that leads beyond karma, to the end of action, to the end of having to feed. If you're observing the precepts, practicing concentration, and developing discernment into what the mind needs to feed on, what it doesn't need to feed on, what kind of feeding is good for it, what kind of feeding is bad for it, and then feed it in such a way that ultimately it gets so strong that it doesn't have to feed anymore, it can let go. And at that point an entirely new dimension opens up in the mind that you couldn't have even conceived before. That's ultimately where the practice leads. It takes this mind which is feeding on the body, feeding on feelings, perceptions, thought constructs, and consciousness and tells it that there are better things to feed on. If you feed on these things, you're going to be really sorry because your food source is going to run out on you very quickly. It's going to keep changing, and with that sense of uncertainty and instability in life, how can the mind find any sense of well-being? At the same time, it turns out that a lot of that food is junk food, which keeps you weak and unhealthy. So you teach the mind better ways to feed through the practice until the path finally issues in a point where the mind is at total equilibrium, doesn't need to feed anymore, and you can let go. So that's where we're headed. As the Buddha said, the only things he teaches are suffering or stress, and then the end of suffering. That may seem like a narrow ideal. What about helping humankind and all the other great issues? He said to straighten out your own mind first, and when that's straightened out, when you're really free, the type of help you can then give to people is the best kind of help. There's no hidden feeding agenda, no hidden need to feed on the sense of pride that comes from being a very helpful or very important person, which can actually spoil the help, spoil the compassion. You're operating from a sense of compassion that comes from total freedom, total independence, which is ultimately the only compassion you can really trust. The Basic Medicine. August 2001. You all know the old image of the Buddha as a doctor and the Dhamma as medicine. When you come to practice the Dhamma, it's as if you're learning to be your own doctor, looking after the illnesses of your own mind. Everyone comes up here wounded in one way or another, suffering either from things outside or from things inside. At the time of the Buddha, people were suffering from greed, anger, and delusion just as we are. With modern culture, modern society, it seems as if we have more diseases of the mind, more complex ways of getting involved in creating delusion, but they all basically come down to the same three roots. So the treatment here is to learn how to uproot the disease. You want to look at your time here as a time for healing. The skills you want to take back with you are those of being not only your own patient, but also your own doctor, learning how to look after the mind, seeing exactly where it needs treatment. And part of the treatment is the kind of healing that requires nourishment and rest. This is a lot of what breath meditation provides. It gives the mind a place to settle down and be at ease with itself, to develop a sense of well-being inside. Stay with the breath as you listen to the Dharma Talk. Don't really listen to what I'm saying. Give 99% of your attention to the breath, leave 1% for the talk in case something good comes by that's actually relevant to what you're doing. Otherwise, don't let the talk distract you from the meditation. Allow the mind to settle in. You want to develop a quality where awareness and the breath become one, where you're right in the middle of the breathing process, instead of being in one part of the body outside the breath, watching another part of the body breathe. You're in the breathing in the breathing out. Allow those two things to stay together. Your awareness in the actual sensation of the breathing. In addition to staying with the sensation of the breath, you'll also have to think about the breathing, to keep the mind from wandering off. If the sensation of the breath isn't enough to keep you with it, then you can use a meditation word along with the breath. You can use the word Buddha, which means awake. Think, Bud with the in breath and Do with the out. buddo. Or think any word that helps keep you with the breathing. And if you want, think of the meditation word filling the whole body. The whole body goes bud, the whole body goes do, so there's no corner of the body where any other thought can come in. You begin to realize that the breath is filling the whole body as well. The whole body gets involved in the breathing process if you allow it to. Every nerve gets involved in this energy flow, so think of them all working together. The breathing is soothing the body, soothing the mind right now, so the mind feels that it can melt in with the breath. The awareness melts into the breath. They become one. However, the meditation is not just a bubble bath for the mind. There's the healing, comforting, soothing aspect, but remember, medicine comes in all sorts of forms. Some of it can be pretty strong. In other words, once the mind settles down, you have to watch after it, make sure it doesn't go wandering off, doesn't get lazy and complacent. If the mind goes wandering off, ask yourself, what trouble are you looking for now? Now that you're beginning to feel a little healed, what new germs are you looking for? What do you hope to get out of that particular thought? And sometimes just this little warning is enough to bring the mind to its senses and bring it back. At other times you have to work at it a little more, focusing in more detail on exactly why you don't want to be thinking right now about anything else. Then bring the mind right back to the breath. So you can't just wallow in the nice side of the breathing. There has to be constant vigilance over the mind, because the problem with the mind is that as soon as it gets comfortable, it starts getting lazy and complacent. That's not the treatment at all. That's not the medicine the Dhamma provides. Once your sense of awareness settles in and gets comfortable, you have to be very watchful to make sure it doesn't slide off someplace else and start creating trouble for you. So as the doctor for your mind, you want to combine these two qualities. On the one hand, there's the sense of ease that comes with the breathing. On the other, you have to maintain mindfulness, you have to maintain alertness. Foster an attitude of heedfulness. Keep focused on the breath. Remember, the sense of ease and comfort is a product of your focus on the breath. If you lose your focus and start focusing on the wrong things, then once the cause is gone, the result is going to have to start fading away as well. You're left with nothing. It's like building up scaffolding and seeing a cloud next to the scaffolding. It looks nice and cottony and comfortable, so you go and jump on the cloud and you go right through. So allow yourself to rest with whatever sense of well-being there is, but remember that there's work to be done. After all, this is medicine. It's not always pleasant. It's not total relaxation. There has to be a certain amount of vigilance to keep the mind with the breath and not let it blur out. One way of doing this, once you've got a sense of ease with the breath, is to start thinking about the breathing process in different parts of the body. Just go through the body parts one by one, seeing how the breath feels at each particular part. You might want to start at the navel and then work up the front of the body, down the back of the body, and out the legs. Then start again at the back of the neck and then go down the shoulders and out the arms. Take the body section by section and notice how each section feels as you breathe in, how it feels as you breathe out. If there's any tension or tightness, let it dissolve in the flow of the breath energy, so that you breathe in without building up any new tension, and breathe out without holding on to any tension that may already be there. Allow the tension to dissolve and then move on to the next section of the body, and then the next. Keep doing this until you've covered the whole body and can sense that all the parts of the body are breathing together in unison. Then try to maintain a broad awareness of that. When the Buddha talks about the 16 steps of breath meditation, number 1 and number 2 are just noticing the breath to see how long or short it is. With number 3 you start training yourself. You're willing yourself to be aware of the whole body. And you'll find that there's a tendency, as you get lazy, for that awareness to shrink. Don't allow that to happen. This is the work you've got to do. Stay with the whole body, the whole body, the whole body as you breathe in, the whole body as you breathe out, and then work to maintain that sense of wholeness. In the beginning you'll find that the work may seem to be too strenuous because you're not doing it very efficiently. Just notice what needs to be done, What doesn't need to be done in order to maintain that whole body awareness until you find that you can maintain it with ease? You'll find that there may be slips. You're working with trial and error here. You're working on a skill. Try to think back to whatever manual skills you've developed: carpentry, sports, cooking skills, whatever, and the attitude you had to foster to help master this skill. If there's a mistake, you don't let yourself get upset by the mistake. Just start all over again. When things turn out well, don't let yourself be complacent. Try to think of other ways to improve what you've done. Or if it can't be improved, learn how not to mess with it, how to keep it going as it is. There's a certain balance, a certain maturity that you have to bring to any skill. That's the kind of attitude you want to bring to the meditation. If you let yourself get too easily discouraged by bad sessions in the meditation, or start getting complacent or cocksure about your good sessions, you're setting yourself up for a fall, and no skill is going to come from that. You want to keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. Whatever mistakes there are, you learn from them. Whenever things go well, you try to learn from them. If you come out of a good meditation session, don't leave it immediately. Reflect on what you did this time, what went right this time. And the more often you do that, the more precise your observation's going to be, the more you start seeing cause and effect as they operate in the mind. We're working on a long-term project here. You come to realize that even though things happening from the outside may be wounding the mind, the real diseases come from within. Our lack of skill in managing our thoughts, our lack of skill in relating to feelings, perceptions, thought constructs, and consciousness. And so what we're doing is learning new skills to relate to what's going on in the mind, along with a new sensitivity that comes with these skills. The skill is not just staying with the breath, but also finding ways to relate to whatever comes into the mind in the course of the day, wherever you are. The sensitivity you build up while you're working on the meditation should be applied to whatever happens throughout the day. It's like taking a beginning art class. You come out of the art class and begin to notice colors and arrangements, not just in paintings, but also all around you. You've gained a heightened sensitivity. The same with the meditation. Try to take the sensitivity that comes with the meditation and apply it to the way you relate to your thoughts and emotions as they arise. This sensitivity is what enables you to start seeing the subtle causes of the diseases in the mind. You come to realize that if the mind doesn't wound itself, it doesn't leave an opening for anything to come in from outside and wound it. We're the ones who lower our own resistance to the outside diseases, allow them to come in and infect the mind in one way or another. If it weren't for these internal tendencies, there wouldn't be any problem with living in the world. The mind would be totally resilient but not insensitive. It simply wouldn't pick up any diseases from outside. The reason it does pick up those diseases is because it leaves an opening from inside in the way it mistreats itself. So we're learning new skills in how the mind can treat itself, how it can relate to itself, taking the breath as our foundation, because it's an excellent barometer for what's going on in the mind. Try to get as familiar as you can with this basic medicine. Once you've got the basic medicine down, learn what other ingredients you need to add for specific ailments as they come, what you should do in the case of anger, what you should do in the case of greed, what you should do in the case of fear, worry, or whatever. But the basic treatment is just this: learning to be with the breath, allowing the breath to be comfortable, and letting that comfortable breath spread throughout the whole body. This is the basic skill upon which all the other skills are based. This is the foundation, so you want to make sure the foundation is solid. Even when you move on to more advanced stages of the meditation, you always want to keep coming back to the breath because it forms the basis for the whole course of treatment. Seeing the stillness. September 2001. When we hear that snakes only see motion, it seems strange to us. We of course think that we see things. All they detect is motion. You can test this out in the orchard. If you sit perfectly still and a snake comes by, the snake won't see you. It'll go right past you as if you weren't there. It'll detect you only if you move. We think that's bizarre. But if you stop to look at the way the mind operates, you'll see that it's pretty much like the way the snake sees. We notice change. That's what we look for. That's what we're constantly noticing. When someone tells us the deathless is right here in the mind, we can't see it because all we can see is change. This thing changes, those things change. If nothing else changes, our mind is changing. It's looking here, looking there, and the change is what we follow. And as a result, what we see is stress. We build our sense of ourselves out of what's changing and stressful, but the Buddha says that it just doesn't work. There's no way we're going to find happiness that way if the we create is based on stress. We have to change the way we look. He insists that we start with the precepts. Remember that. The precepts are meant to change the way we perceive things. We start by acting in new ways. The word for the precepts, for virtue sila, also means something that's normal. We try to create a sense of normalcy in the mind. The mind's normal state is when it's not deciding to kill or steal or have illicit sex or lie or take intoxicants. But it's a state of mind we tend to overlook. The Buddha tells us to bring the mind to normalcy first by bringing our words and deeds to normalcy. When that state of normalcy grows more consistent, it grows stronger, to where you can actually notice it. Then you begin to think back to the days when you weren't observing the precepts. You realize the sense of dis-ease, out of balance, out of equilibrium you had. When you compare that with the sense of normalcy you're now beginning to detect, you see there's been a genuine improvement. And as the normalcy is allowed to be more pervasive, it fills more of your life. The same principle works as you're practicing concentration. You sit here with a body, you notice that there's a pain here and a pain there. The mind tends to connect the pains in the same way we play connect the dots, and that can cause you to create bands of tension all over your body. But instead of focusing on the bands of tension, look at the broader sense of ease surrounding them. It's like looking at the blank spaces on a map. We tend to look at the roads and the cities and the words, but the blank spaces serve a function, too. Otherwise, the placement of the roads and cities wouldn't bear any relation to the actual lay of the land. So allow the breath to be in a state of normalcy. Think back to when you've been in a good mood. Nothing really exciting, but just a basic okay sense of well-being. What was your breath like then? What was the visceral feel of that mood? You can try to tune back into that feeling. It's there. Tune back into the way the breath felt at that point, and allow it to have that same sense of ease. Then notice where the other areas of ease are, here and there in the body, that you tend to overlook. Where are they? Can you connect them to the sense of ease you've developed around the breathing? Try to keep them connected, both in space and in time. In other words, allow the different parts of the body that feel at ease to connect right here in the present moment, and then maintain that sense of connected well-being, based on the breath, as continuously as you can. At first it may not seem like anything special. But if you allow it to stay connected, if you don't interfere with it and don't jump away from it, you'll find that it grows stronger and stronger. You develop a real sense of fullness. You just sit here breathing in and out, and there's nothing else you need to do to feel content, nothing else the mind would want, simply because you've learned how to change the way you look at things. Then the skill lies in maintaining that state. Keeping this sense of awareness, keeping this sense of well-being filling the body as much as possible, and then maintaining contact with that state, allowing it to grow, allowing it to develop. Don't jump away from it, thinking, well, this can take care of itself. I wonder what that's like over there. I wonder what this is like over here. This is not yet the time to follow those thoughts, for the sense of well-being can't take care of itself. This is the time to develop your ability to stay centered in well-being and allow it to fill the body. It's like having a kid. After it's been born, you can't say, well, that was interesting. Now I want to go off and star in a play. You've got to commit yourself to looking after the kid until it grows old enough and mature enough to stand on its own 2 feet. It's the same with these fragile states of concentration and comfort in the present moment. You've got to keep tending to the various comfortable sensations in the body. Keep them connected. And as with the child, they'll do a lot of the growing on their own. Your duty is simply to tend to them, to allow them to grow. As they stay connected, they strengthen one another without your having to push or pull them, without your having to anticipate anything. Give them the time and the space to do what they have to do. Once that sense of well-being is really solid, then you can go back and examine the mind's tendency to look at what's inconstant, what's stressful, what's not self. This time around, though, you're looking at the question from a different perspective. In the past you used to jump from one thing to another, looking for something to settle on for a while, looking for something that would give you well-being, and constantly being thwarted. So you jumped again, looking for happiness in things that have to change. This time, however, you look at the mind's tendency to jump in and of itself. Instead of focusing on the things you jump at, just look at the mind's tendency to jump at this, jump at that, to see what's happening. Try to comprehend the mind's tendency to look for things that are inconstant and stressful. When the Buddha taught the first noble truth, he said to comprehend suffering. That's why we need to have this sense of well-being first, before we can look at stress and suffering for the purpose of comprehending it. If we don't have a sense of well-being, then when we see suffering, we'll want to get rid of it or jump away from it. But if you've developed a deep, abiding sense of ease, you're in a position where you're willing just to watch the suffering without feeling threatened by it. That way you can comprehend it. In what ways does the mind move that create stress? Look for them. Then you begin to see that the problem is not with the things you were jumping at, but with the way the mind jumps, the way it looks for things, its clinging, its cravings. When you shift your focus from the things to the jumping, you can see that tendency more and more clearly. You can detect it more quickly, to the very beginning points where the mind is beginning to stir, getting ready to jump, getting ready to flow out. That's what the word asava means. The tendency of the mind to flow at this thing, flow at that thing. When you begin to see why this happens, you can cut it off. At first you can do this with blatant instances, and then you get more and more subtle. When you've taken care of the blatant outflows, then you can turn around and take apart the tendency to flow around this sense of well-being you created here through your concentration. When you can take that apart, that's when there's real release. In the meantime, though, you want to maintain that sense of well-being, keep it going, because that's the point from which you're doing all the work that ultimately will take you to the point where the only thing standing in the way of release is the you identified with the concentration. Our problem is that we approach the Dhamma using our habitual tendency to jump. We want to jump to the ultimate right away. When you get into a Dhamma conversation, within 4 or 5 words you're already talking about the absolute, talking about the uncompounded or whatever. People don't like the work that goes in between. Everyone wants to hear the easy way to overcome laziness or the quick way to overcome impatience, but that doesn't work. Laziness is overcome by making an effort. Impatience is overcome by sticking with things for a long time. Yet the results are more than worth it. That's the guarantee of the practice. So meditation does involve work, it does involve patience, it takes time, it takes skill, it takes precision, but the Buddha teaches us to develop these qualities on the solid foundation of well-being that you can develop by the way you relate to the breath, by the way you relate to the easeful sensations in the body, the places where the energy does flow properly. Focus on those first and then you can work with the places where the energy doesn't flow properly. But always try to work from a position of strength, from a position of normalcy. That way you'll find that normalcy grows stronger, more and more pervasive, more and more satisfying. We're on a path, but it's not a path that saves all its good things for the end. There are a lot of good things that come along the way if you learn to look in the right places and make the best use of the good things you've got. This is the teaching that Ajahn Lee stresses over and over again. We've got the 5 khandhas. Everybody knows the 5 khandhas are stressful, inconstant, and not self. But he says, don't be in too great a hurry to throw them away. Learn how you can use them. After all, what is the path made out of if not feelings and perceptions and thought constructs and consciousness? Learn how to use these things. What is Rupa Jhana made out of? It's based on form, the first khandha, and includes the other 4 khandhas as well. Learn how to use these things in a way that turns your objects of delusion and suffering into the path. Once the path has done its job, then you let it go. But first you have to learn where to hold on to. You can't let go of everything all at once. You let go in stages until the path's work is completed. Then you let go. That way you let go without hurting yourself. It's like climbing a ladder. If you let go halfway up, you just fall down to the ground. If you climb the ladder to the roof, then when you've reached the roof you can let of the ladder because you're standing on something safe and secure. So it all comes down to discernment, seeing what really should be let go, what order things are let go in, and what you have to depend on in the meantime. Once those distinctions are clear, then the path falls into place. As we wrap up today's reading, we extend an invitation for your ongoing participation. Just as Buddha urged us to share and support his teachings for the greater good, we urge you to join in. Help us spread these profound teachings to all by subscribing, liking, and sharing. Your involvement ensures these valuable insights reach far and wide, touching lives everywhere. Embrace this chance to ignite positive change and understanding. We eagerly await your presence in the upcoming episodes, as together, we strive to illuminate minds and sow seeds of empathy worldwide.